Good afternoon, everybody. I hope that you all are having a fantastic day, and I'm so glad that you could join me this afternoon to discuss climate and culture and alternative education and the impacts it has on students. My name is Heather Lester, and I am an ELA instructional specialist for the Oklahoma Excel Project. I came from Oklahoma City Public Schools from Southern Hills Elementary, and before that, I taught at Putnam City North High School. My email and phone number are provided here for you. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to use those. And there's also a link to the presentation that we are about to get started on. Hopefully by the end of this presentation, we will have been able to achieve some of these goals and that you have some resources and ideas to take back with you to your school. Our session goals are to be able to create a safe, caring, and orderly climate and culture that provides collegial relationships among students, parents, and staff, and to be able to create norms, values, and expectations that support people feeling socially, emotionally, and physically safe. Identifying and reflecting on where your school currently is in terms of not only physical attributes, but also what is the feeling when you are walking down the hallways or in classrooms, cafeterias, libraries, etc. What sounds do you hear? Do you hear yelling, laughing, silence? Is one of the first steps in being able to move forward. We can't make any progress if we don't know where we are starting. It's a good idea to look at your school with different lenses. How do you think the school looks, feels, or seems as a teacher or a staff member, a student, a parent, or a community member? So as you reflect on that, what challenges does your school face in regards to discipline, chronic absenteeism, and fostering relationships? Keep those challenges in the forefront of your mind as we continue to discuss today. I wanted to start us off with a quote by Maurice Elias. True change requires a focus on creating school culture that supports academic, social, emotional, and character development of children.
America's public schools are failing students in multiple ways. One of the most disruptive is the process by which students are funneled out of the public school system and into the juvenile justice system. It's called the school-to-prison pipeline, and there is increasing evidence that it starts as early as preschool. The school-to-prison pipeline primarily victimizes Black students, trapping them in a cycle of discipline and incarceration, according to Dr. Kenneth D. Waters, diversity educator and researcher.
I want to believe that every student wants to overcome the societal predictions of what's placed on them because of their race, sex, and the socioeconomic status.
Increasingly, schools are cracking down on small offenses, such as cutting class or being disrespectful. This is supposed to discourage more serious infractions, like drug or weapons possession. But what constitutes disobedience or disrespect can be very subjective. A study in Texas found that 97% of the state's suspensions were for subjective reasons, made at the discretion of school administrators. And Black students were 31% more likely to receive discretionary suspensions than white students.
It obviously affects the individual who is actually entering the penal system, but you're affecting communities, you're affecting the economy, you're affecting families, you're affecting school systems.
The disparity can start as early as preschool, when 48% of preschoolers who are suspended more than once are Black. Black students are 3 times more likely to be suspended or expelled than their white counterparts. And Black girls are suspended at higher rates than girls of any other race.
I want to believe every student is destined for success. They want to achieve. But more times than not, we can't control certain things that happen in their homes. I had a student years ago. By the time they got to school, they said, hey, I walked through a crack house facility, prostitution. When I get here, I walk through a metal detector and people bother me. And I haven't eaten since lunch yesterday. And you're asking me to sit here in class and learn? There's a challenge.
When students are kept out of school as punishment, they miss lessons and assignments and fall behind academically. They are also more likely to be disciplined again, which can lead to further problems. The Texas study found that students who had been suspended or expelled were twice as likely to drop out. Adding to the problem, police officers stationed inside schools to prevent serious crimes. When these officers react overzealously to minor infractions, they make small problems worse. Schools with officers have 5 times as many arrests for disorderly conduct as schools without them. But there are solutions.
We need more of our educators to take a genuine interest in the whole student as opposed to what they want to teach on a board and so forth. Do not be quick to actually discipline them, but be more mindful of the predicament they may be coming from and have an understanding of why they're doing what they're doing. Now, I'm not saying take away the discipline, but as you're adding that disciplinary act or that consequence, you're explaining, why am I doing this? You're explaining the reason I am disciplining you is because this happened and this is how you can fix this down the line. I'm showing the genuine interest of actually being restorative and helping you and moving forward so this won't happen again and be repeated.
There are also proactive solutions, including hiring school guidance counselors instead of more police officers. Experts like Kenneth say the best way to prevent incarceration is to provide more equal educational opportunities and to create environments that support all students.
So now I have some discussion prompts here, and you're more than welcome to unmute and chime in, or you can do a private chat. So what are some practical ways in which you could find alternatives to suspension? Does having officers in your schools make the staff feel safe, the students feel safe, or the parents feel safe? And how can we shift teachers' mindsets? All right, so the first thing we're going to talk about is the school to prison pipeline. This is a set of policies and
Daniel, were you going to ask a question?
Oh, when you're talking suspensions, are we talking in-school suspensions or out of school, or just suspensions in general?
Well, we're mainly talking about out of school suspensions, but in-school suspensions do the same thing, right? They're losing instructional time.
Okay. Just clarifying. Thank you.
No problem. So the school to prison pipeline is a set of policies and procedures that drive our nation's school children onto a pathway that begins in school and ends in the criminal justice system. So what thoughts does this cartoon elicit? Right? We have, right, one man in a suit with public education, right, with the streamline of students going right into the mouths of prison industrial So inside of the school to prison pipeline, we have the broken window theory. So in New York, there was a big drop in crime in the 1990s. Here's why. So when a neighborhood is filled with graffiti, petty crime, and broken windows, it says to the community that no one cares and no one is watching, and hence an invitation for more serious criminal activity. So the city of New York began cleaning up the physical environment and making a show of cracking down on minor crimes. They painted over the graffiti covering subway cars, increased misdemeanor arrests like public drunkenness and failing to pay subway fares, and otherwise focused on policing the smallest details. They were sending a message that indeed someone cared and was watching as soon as they began cracking down on these smaller quality of life crimes. So if the environment triggers the belief that no one cares or that no one is in charge, then in theory, crime in that environment goes up. So while in theory, this sounds like a great idea, you clean up the environment, you make arrests for even the smallest of crimes, and clean up the homeless situation. Sounds perfect, right? In fact, this theory is severely flawed. The part of the story that New York City leaves out is that how the prisons became overcrowded and that the homeless were merely moved to another neighborhood. This is not fixing the problem, it is merely putting a Band-Aid on a very large wound. All we have really done is create bigger problems. What we should do is find out why we have a homeless population. If we are not mindful of how we respond to situations, we can sometimes repeat this in the classroom. Imagine with me, if you will, that you are standing in front of an open closet or a row of hooks along a wall of your classroom, looking at a collection of student backpacks. Some of the backpacks are lying rumpled on the floor, some are hanging sideways from a shoulder strap, and a few are hanging appropriately by the center hook loop. Several of the backpacks are unzipped, exposing various articles of clothing and old assignments. While it is important to attend to these small details, the manner in which we do it is crucial, and we must be mindful that we don't create bigger problems as an unintended result. So consider these two approaches when addressing the backpack issue. Don't forget to put your backpacks up when we come in the classroom. Whose backpack is this? Tina, this looks like your backpack. I have told you 1,000,000 times what to do with your backpack. Go pick it up right now. So, second approach, remember our procedure for hanging up the backpacks, everyone. We can't have these backpacks on the floor because it's not safe. And in our mind, we say, this looks like Tina's backpack. She hasn't hung up her backpack all week. I'm wondering what's going on with her. Enforcing rules and standards of behavior that protect a classroom's pleasantness, i.e. polite interactions and practices, kindness, cleanliness, orderliness, and organization, are crucial to building a harmonious and orderly environment. Details that support established routines, procedures, and high expectations should be attended to. However, we have to be ever mindful in how we approach those details so that we don't simply put a Band-Aid on a wound and inadvertently cause bigger problems. So in the broken window theory, this theory increases the number of suspensions. There are more suspensions for offenses that previously had not warranted suspensions in the past, like talking back, being disobedient, disruptive to the learning process, things that are considered subjective suspensions. And this theory is flawed. We do not want to continue to increase suspensions for these minor and subjective infractions. Just as in New York, we do not want to overcrowd prisons and send the homeless people to homeless camps. By cracking down on these minor offenses, we have merely created other problems and created an illusion of solving the problem, i.e. kicking the bad kid out of class. What we need to focus on are routines, procedures, and policies. The power to manage your classroom and enjoy every day of teaching is in the details. Though at first glance, disordered backpacks may not seem like such a big deal. They send the message that respect for others, neatness, and pride in doing things the right way are not valued. But we are not cracking down on subjective behaviors, especially that relate to culture, like saggy pants, dreadlocks. Rather, we are focusing on routines, procedures, and expectations. We want to handle things in the classroom so it doesn't lead to office referrals. We've all dug our heels in with a student over a minor infraction like a backpack not being hung up correctly. I promise you I have done it, right? This is how they end up with an office referral. We need to learn to de-escalate these situations without making them worse. Having clear expectations, routines, and procedures will decrease the likelihood of having discipline issues, especially these minor subjective infractions. Saying things like, remember the procedure, we hang our backpack up when we enter the room. Do not call out students individually for a procedural infraction. More focus needs to be put on protocols, procedures, and expectations rather than on cracking down on individual subjective minor instances. And suspension sends them back to an unsupervised toxic home environment and they lose instructional time. They return farther behind, more resentful, and they continue the pattern. So now on to zero tolerance discipline policies. These zero tolerance discipline policies involve policies that quickly and aggressively involve law enforcement, A zero tolerance policy requires school officials to hand down specific, consistent, and harsh punishment, usually suspension or expulsion, when students break certain rules. The punishment applies regardless of the circumstances, the reason for the behavior, or the student's history of discipline problems. There needs to be a human element to discipline and really work on getting to the root cause of why there's a discipline issue in the first place. Do you ever notice patterns of when students are acting out? Find out about what's going on at home. Suspending the student only gets them out of the building so they can come back and repeat the behavior. Finding out the root cause of the behavior allows us to try and fix it. So zero tolerance discipline policies have proven to be ineffective, and they create too many expulsions and suspensions. Students need to be heard, and sometimes the way that they are telling us that something is wrong is by their actions. Zero tolerance policies do not fix the problem, rather they continue to allow the problem to grow and only to create more problems rather than any solutions. So this school to prison pipeline fuels a sense of urgency to discover key elements of a school's climate and culture that will serve the most vulnerable populations, regardless of ethnicity or experience. And the goal is to keep the students from further involvement in government delinquency and incarceration systems. And when schools are suspending students at high rates, we are contributing to the school to prison pipeline. Now, schools aren't deliberately sending students into the juvenile justice system. In some instances, schools are relying too heavily on police officers. Imagine with me, if you will, a young man about 14. He gets bullied at school, and another boy always comes up to him and punches him. One day he's had enough and he hits back. The administration considers this a fight, and the zero tolerance policy says no fighting, so they both get suspended. This obviously goes on the young man's school record. The next year, he gets into a shouting and shoving match with two boys in the cafeteria. The school's officer arrested all the boys, and the judge gave the young man probation. Well, things aren't going very well at home, and his absences have started to mount up, and his grades are struggling. But he tries out for the football team, and he gets rejected because of his suspensions and his grades. So now this young man is angry, and he's struggling with school, and so he drops out. Dropping out of school violated the terms of his probation, so he got put in jail. After he got out, he tried working in some fast food places, but couldn't make ends meet, so he ended up selling drugs. The story is not exaggerated. In fact, it is an all too common tale. Only 64% of Oklahoma's African American and Latino males graduate from high school. So what are some thoughts as you view this cartoon? You see the alternative school with the teacher poking their head out of the window, the SRO holding a student out of the window with the word expelled on his t-shirt. The SRO is saying that we can't afford to save this one, but don't worry, someone will catch him. And down below, you have the gangs ready to catch him, the judicial system is getting ready to catch him, and the welfare system is pulling up. So now we're going to talk about adverse childhood experiences, also referred to as ACE. Alternative education has a high number of students that have experienced this. Bad behavior can be misconstrued by school personnel. The effects of ACE may include difficulty trusting and benefiting from relationships, disrupted cognitive processes such as memory, attention, and thinking, increased risk of chronic health conditions, inability to cope with normal stresses and strains of daily living, and an inability to regulate behavior or control the expression of emotions. What we tend to identify as maladaptive behaviors are really misapplied survival skills. So this bad behavior is oftentimes a student's survival technique that they have adapted. The student's survival skills often come out into three categories. They fight, they flight, or they freeze. Right? We also have emotional capacity to deal with, right? A 16-year-old boy who's experienced this often has the emotional capacity of a 6-year-old. So when we say things like, act your age, they are acting their age, right? They have the emotional capacity. Remember, everyone in the classroom has a story that leads to misbehavior or defiance. 9 times out of 10, the story behind the misbehavior won't make you angry, it will break your heart. And fear can look like anger. All right, we have trauma-informed care. So trauma affects children in so many different ways. Some kids are reactive while others are reserved. It is key to know the students' stories in order to know how to support them. Creating an environment that feels safe to learn in, explicitly connect to students, to the school community, and provide opportunities to practice newly developing skills. Right? It is our job to make sure that we support students both academically and socially.
See, there are 2 words, folks: climate, culture. Some of us will try to raise achievement levels and get young people to soar in a toxic climate and culture. See, it doesn't work. And when I say climate and culture, climate first, I mean the mood of the school, the mood of the classroom. See, I don't mean individual moods of individual folks in a building. I mean the building has a mood, and the mood will dictate whether or not children are going to be successful. So when we consciously shape and mold the mood of the school, and we say this is going to be a mood of excellence, a mood of high expectation, a mood where it's okay to take off your mask and check it at the door and let me just be me. A mood where children can win. But then culture, which I'm defining as the lifestyle. What's the lifestyle there? I tell educators every day, when I go into schools as a consultant and I look at the adults and they do this. Hey, pull your pants up. Pull your pants up. Pull your pants up. From 8 to 3. Pull your pants up. Pull your pants up. Hey, pull your pants up. I said, don't they look silly? I said, there's no way in the world that I will spend a day telling youngsters to pull up their pants. I am going to put structures in place so that when they walk through the door, they just know this is what they expect of me when I'm in this building.
So, have you ever walked into a building and felt an instant mood? What can you do as a school to create a positive mood as a student enters? What do you think the mood of your school is? And do you think your students perceive it differently? So the NSCC defines school climate as the quality and character of school life. School climate is based on patterns of students, parents, and school personnel's experiences of school life. It also reflects norms, goals, values, interpersonal relationships, teaching and learning practices, and organizational structures.
When I think about obstacles to school improvement, I'm really thinking of urban schools. I'm thinking of some rural schools as well, but I'm primarily thinking urban. I'm thinking tough urban districts, tough urban cities. And one of the biggest obstacles that I find is the pressure to perform on standardized assessments, but forgetting school climate and culture. And I say that school climate and culture trump everything else that we do. That climate, which I define as the mood of the school, has to be conducive to a youngster having a willingness to soar within that school. But then when I look at the culture, which I'm defining as the lifestyle of the school, that lifestyle has to be one such that Outside, I may be who I am and whatever pressures and demands that I have to conform to. But once I come into that building, I can just kind of let my guard down, take my mask off and just be me and give forth maximum effort. But there's got to be a culture in place and a climate in place that enable me to do so.
So according to the NEA, an exemplary alternative education program maintains a safe, caring, and orderly climate and culture that promotes collegial relationships among students, parents or guardians, and program staff. The program culture and climate are characterized by a positive rather than punitive atmosphere for behavioral management and student discipline. Program staff establishes clear expectations for learning and student conduct, and the staff actively models and rewards appropriate student behavior. The program uses proven practices such as positive behavior support to organize student support systems. The alternative program actively promotes connections among students and between program staff that is positive and encourages academic, behavioral, and social success. So now I have something a little bit on the lighter side because this was all kind of heavy.
I would like to take just a minute to talk about positive climate and culture in your building or your office or your company. I've read a lot of books on this because it's very important, and all these books say the same thing. So I've narrowed 15 or 16 books down into 2 words, and these 2 words will help change the climate and culture at your office or building or company. Simply remember these 2 words: pudding, Oprah. You get a pudding, you get a pudding, everybody gets a pudding. If you just remember those 2 words, pudding, Oprah, your climate and culture will improve drastically.
So I thought that video was very relevant to what we were talking about today while adding a little humor, right? So remembering those 2 words, pudding and Oprah, how do you think that you can get your staff to create a positive climate and culture? Or how do you get your staff to feel as if the school has a positive climate and culture? So according to the National School Climate Council in 2007, a positive school climate includes shared norms, values, and expectations that support people feeling socially, emotionally, and physically safe, people feeling engaged and respected. Students, families, and educators work together to develop and contribute to a shared school vision. Right? It's also where educators model and nurture attitudes that emphasize the benefits and satisfaction gained from learning. And each person contributes to the operations of the school and the care of the physical environment. In order to create a safe, caring, and orderly climate and culture that promotes relationships among students, parents, and staff, first you have to identify and implement proven practices to foster healthy communities. And the climate and culture of the school should be characterized by a positive atmosphere rather than a punitive atmosphere. I know that I've said that several times, but I don't know that it can be emphasized enough. Having a positive atmosphere rather than a punitive one will directly impact student discipline. Imagine having a boss that wrote you up every time that you did something wrong or made a mistake. How would that make you feel? I personally would not be very trusting of that individual, and I would ultimately become very resentful and continue a pattern of bad behavior. Now imagine that you had a boss that was positive, uplifting. Instead of writing you up every time you did something wrong, they coached you on how to improve. I know that I would work harder for the positive and uplifting boss. Think about this, how this relates to your students. The school staff should establish and enforce with cohesiveness clear expectations for learning and conduct. The staff of the school needs to be a cohesive unit, and the only way to create a positive climate and culture is to make sure that the entire staff will support, uphold, and enforce the expectations that we've set forth. The staff, as a collective whole, has to set the mood for the entire school. School staff should actively model and reward appropriate student behaviors, and there should be connections among all stakeholders that should be positive and encourage academic, behavioral, and social success. So one way in creating a positive climate and culture is the aesthetics, right? Pull away from drab colors, bring in color and softness and personalization to the building. Keep the building and all surrounding areas well maintained, and make sure the building is physically accessible. The building should support optimal student learning. This is easy stuff to fix for the most part, but still training students and staff on the expectations of being proud of where you work and learn so they know not to throw trash on the ground. And when somebody does, they can look at them and say, "I'm sorry, but we don't do that here." So one of the things about positive school culture and climate is when we talk about rigor. So rigor does not mean more homework or more worksheets. In fact, rigor is the teacher talking way less and the students talking and doing way more. Doesn't that sound nice? I think it does. So imagine with me, if you will, a US history class that had to take a blank map and label all of the states and put their capitals list and all of the US presidents, the number of terms they served, and one thing each of them did while in office. This sounds hard and rigorous, but actually this is just rote memorization. Now, another US history class, the students were assigned a specific president and they had to write an inaugural address for that particular president, understand the cultural and hot political topics of the time, what had happened during the previous presidential terms, what the incoming president's platform was. That's rigor. That required creativity and deep thinking and analysis and evaluation. So now if we look at these two pictures here, which one is the rigorous activity? Right, so we have one about writing about first person. They talk about what first person is, right, how it relates to the story. The other one is where they talk about facts about the country, what challenges or problems do the people of these countries face with their education and reading, and how are these challenges or problems being solved, right? And it says to support your answer with text evidence. Very clearly, My Librarian as a Camel assignment is the rigorous activity in that situation, right? Just because something is bigger, right, or harder to do doesn't always mean that it's rigorous, right? So schools often under-request from their students for fear of losing them, right? But actually the exact opposite is true. They lose students when they are not engaged in the work. And this is where discipline problems come in, right? They're not engaged in the work, so then they act out. So Vygotsky believed that when a student was in their zone of proximal development for a particular task, providing the appropriate assistance will give the student enough boost to achieve the task. This is the difference between what a student can do without help and what they can do with guidance and encouragement. Scaffolding is given and slowly taken away until the student can achieve it without help. It is important, though, to not let the student struggle in what they cannot do where they get frustrated and give up. Right? You want students to have what's called productive struggle. And students can experience productive struggle when given a task slightly beyond their abilities. As educators provide support for tackling a challenging problem through different approaches, they can help build critical thinking skills and develop grit. The object isn't necessarily to get the right answer, but to engage in this process to advance learning and develop perseverance. It's uncomfortable to struggle, but struggling, falling down and getting back up is an important facet to learning. Productive struggle is not about being in pain or becoming frustrated. So to help students embrace struggle as part of the learning process, we have to let them know that it's okay not to know the right answer. And the goal is to participate in the discovery process. In addition, educators are there to support students when they get stuck. So here are some benefits of creating a positive climate and culture in your school, right? We have some obvious safety benefits. right? There's physical, social, and emotional benefits of students feeling safe at school. And before learning can take place, students must feel safe. There's a dramatic decrease in risky behaviors and lower rates of student suspensions and discipline issues in general. Right? We have some positive results in teaching and learning. And the effect of positive school climate not only contributes to improved academic outcomes among diverse groups of students, but effects seem to persist for years. You have higher graduation rates, and there's a powerful correlation between improved school climate and increased motivation to learn. Positive school climate is correlated with decreased student absenteeism in middle school and high school and lower rates of student suspension in high school. I have one last video to show you, because here he is again, because I really like him.
See, when I was a principal for 14 years in Newark, New Jersey, and East Orange, New Jersey, my students knew I wake up in the morning for them. It guided me. It drove me. I was consumed by it. My life devoted to them. So the school, the last one I was at, 6 years, Newark Tech, it had never met AYP. It was an underperforming school. It was a low-performing school with all the stereotypes and trappings of an urban school. But the leader went in there and he said to staff that anything less than 100% proficiency on New Jersey standardized assessments is unacceptable. I know it's going to happen. So when we got those scores 5 years later at 100% proficiency, there was no shock because we went to work on attitudes. But Principal Caffelli, what did you do? Oh, it's very simple. Every single day, bar none, told every student in the building that you are special, that you are great, that you are extraordinary, and said it with a smile, and said it with a handshake, or even a hug. And Principal Caffelli, you mean to tell me, by you telling kids they were great, your math score shot up through the roof? Yeah, I'm standing here this morning telling you that. Just telling them they're great. Because it changed the way they saw themselves. Principal Caffelli, you mean you're telling me because you shook their hand and said good morning, that raised achievement levels? That made a kid that was in a gang act differently? That made a kid that had been abused behave differently? Change their outlook? I'm saying absolutely.
So school connectedness is obviously a powerful predictor of and is associated with adolescent health and academic outcomes. And you also have improved staff morale. In schools where students perceive a better structured school, fair discipline practices, and more positive student-teacher relationships, the probability and frequency of subsequent behavioral problems is significantly lower. Having a safe, caring, participatory, and responsive school climate fosters greater attachment to school and provides the optimal foundation for social, emotional, and academic learning. So some reflection questions for this session. How will the school leadership team establish and communicate high expectations for all students and adults? What will the school leadership do to foster trust and collaboration among staff to improve student learning? And what interventions have school leadership tried in the past, and what were the results? Thank you so much for spending some time with me today. I believe Jennifer has some words to say.
Good afternoon. I am so excited that you guys joined us today. As a high schooler, I had the very cool opportunity of being a lifeguard at Whitewater Bay, for those of you that live in the metro. And it even to this day stands out that as much as we had to have our physical training and we had to learn the CPR and all of those kinds of things. It was as much about building that rapport and that relationship, because it was a focus so much as to tell them to please walk instead of yelling at them to stop running or don't run, because it was all in how we approach things. And if even as a high schooler, we understood the business component, we might as well start to bring that into the classroom setting as well. And if you're looking at alt-ed data that we've been collecting over the last few years, we have had pretty significant improvement in the number of students that we are even re-engaging, those dropouts that we're bringing back into the educational setting in the alternative ed program. And last year, we re-engaged about 1,200 students that weren't being successful in the traditional setting and had already dropped out. But on that same flip side, we have had last year about 1,500 students that, for one reason or another, still did not make it in the alternative education setting. And so we have to start asking ourselves, what about the traditional setting wasn't working? And how are we going to implement those components of the alt-ed law to help stabilize and educate? So we need to understand that it's an individualized and effective instruction. And that's not just academics, and that's not just your math and your reading, but that's the social emotional piece as well. We have to understand that we do have a new rubric this year that is gone a little bit deeper into utilizing the data that we've been collecting. What's that climate culture survey that you're now required to give telling you, and how are you implementing that into your life skills instruction and into your biweekly counseling with students? Now remember, that climate culture survey, it's effective if you give it to the faculty and the students, but you're highly effective on that rubric if you give it to your parents as well, because they've got a piece to play. And for one reason or another, they're just sometimes as disengaged with the educational setting as the students can be. So bringing in all parties to try and make that. Over the last 2 years, we've also focused on restorative justice practices and how we can kind of use all of our strategies before trying to kick those kiddos out of school, either with suspension or other means. Last week, we were able to bring in Dr. Joe Hendershot, who really focuses on wounded students. And what that difference is he says a lot of research and a lot of time is spent on that at-risk kid, that potential for something to happen. But we have millions of students that have already had something happen to them, something traumatic happen to them. And he refers to those as wounded students. And those are typically what are coming to us in the alternative ed setting. So we need to recognize that trauma has already occurred. They're adapting and developing some survival skills that sometimes aren't as productive in the classroom setting. And so what are we doing? And he provided those last week with a resource guide on many different strategies to kind of help do what's been discussed for the last hour. Are there any last questions? All right, so several things. At the end of February, we're going to have a regional meeting. I believe it's 9 to noon. You guys are bringing your strategies, you're bringing your resources, and you're bringing your questions surrounding engagement and attendance. Those are the two big reasons alt-ed kiddos come to us. They're not engaged and they're not coming. I will have some stuff available if you guys stare at me surrounding restorative justice and trauma. So that we can kind of start some conversations, but we definitely want to be answering those questions that you may have, because if you've got them, someone else might have them. The other thing is that we do on March 6th from 8 to noon, we do have an alternative education day at the Capitol, an advocacy day for us. We have requested quite a bit more money this year, and we do have a proposed legislation, House Bill 2520 over there. So if you are able to make it, if you're able to bring some kiddos, some parents, that's great too. Just email me, let me know if you haven't already. Thanks so much for joining.